Sure.
No, you're all very welcome to another episode of this podcast. Myself, Adam Wilson, and I'm delighted to have on the other line is Harry Shum from Hong Kong. I know Harry from a community called Uncommon Success, but also he's an ATG coach. Harry, welcome to the podcast, and just give the listeners a quick, brief intro about yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks for the intro, Adam. So basically, I met Adam almost online virtually in a group called Uncommon Success. And then, I've also done ATG myself, who right now is like a level 1 certified coach. And mostly, could start with the backstory, I guess.
Yeah,
So before I went to college, right, I was, in high school and I was averaging around 30 a game, but I always kind of had like injuries around, especially my ankles. And then once I kind of went to college, I was a little bit undersized, very, very light as well compared to my peers who's in the UK, because I studied high school in Hong Kong, so the weight difference isn't too big. But once I went to the UK, it was like a huge difference. So injuries also piled up on me for my ankles. And even though I went undrafted and then went into second team bench, I wasn't really making, the progress that I kind of want to see to kind of make it to the first team. And then I stumbled upon into, either with those guys, Ben Patrick. And, I started to do some of the program, full range of motion stuff, really getting strong in some of the basic stuff. And, also actually working on some defensive stuff because I feel like I have the quality to become a defensive pest. And by the end of the third year, just to sum up, I basically became a starter on the first team. And and then that was how I, came from being broken into becoming, a bit more athletic and also securing a basketball scholarship. And then once I kind of went back to Hong Kong, basketball, I wasn't really trying to pursue it because I was already a full-time physio. So I decided to pursue something else, which is Journey to the Rim, which you can see on my page on Instagram. And from there, I was initially, week 1, wasn't able to touch the rim at all. I was hardly able to slap the backboard off 2 and 1 foot. And right now, with consistency, which is basically almost a year of training, with the plyometrics added into my routine, I was able to basically grab rim off, a left-right approach, and single leg jumps are getting, going along pretty well. So, um, huge, kind of background about me, but yeah.
Savage, great intro. And um, just on terms of, right, so a little bit back about your athleticism journey before we touch in. Like this podcast will be basically Harry. Why I have Harry on is that he has some great feats of athleticism himself, and also he's coaching some very high level basketball players in Hong Kong. Some are ex NBA and some are the Chinese Basketball Association. But just to touch on firstly a little bit more about yourself on your athleticism, because it's very interesting for my part. Is you're 5'7" and you're able within a year to grab the rim. So that's a really great display of athleticism. So just in terms of actually the how, like you obviously you got the ATG stuff that kind of helped your ankle and fix you. And how much of the plyometrics then were you doing in terms of whether it was your basketball training or actual separate plyometric sessions themselves?
So usually on top of my training, which is about 4 days a week of weight training,
Yeah.
usually I split it into lower and the upper. I also add, once a week of plyometrics. I could actually technically add, to 2 jump sessions a week, but I felt like to manage kind of the recovery process and the, the load upon plyometrics because it's really neurologically intensive. I felt that, once a week was sufficient for me, and maybe for the next year I might bump it to 2. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I think the general kind of census is, Ben Patrick and a lot of the HG coaches is, if you're playing your sport, that's your plyometrics is kind of covered. But if you're not like yourself, if you're doing it, let's say, as a standalone once a week, if you're with the intent, I think if the intent and the quality is there, once a week is very much sufficient to get great gains. And the fact that he just says it's so neurologically demanding that, you don't want to overdo it. have your CNS bride, where that's going to impact on your other sessions or the rest of your week's training. So yeah, I think if you're doing one good hard session, applying metrics seems to be the kind of standard. Just moving on. So like Harry, he's only 22. You're only 22, just gone 22. You're training some high level basketball players. How did that all come about? And maybe the approach that you're using with these players.
Yeah, um so actually there was a player who's also an athlete who currently plays for one of the teams in Hong Kong called Eastern Long Lions. His name is Oliver Su. So his Instagram page is at How to Make the NBA. And he actually was one of the first few that flew to Ben Patrick's headquarters back in I think 2018. And yeah, he was basically playing at Rice as a walk-on player, and then he decided to fly out to Ben Patrick and actually get some off-season games with him. And from there, like he knows that, and then we kind of connected before I went to college. And we always kind of kept in touch. And while I was trying to develop some of the knowledge on the physio side to help athletes, I also, of course, stumbled upon onto ATG, and we kind of have that commonality in a sense, and we basically have that common ground to kind of feed off of each other. And from there, we kind of talked about the philosophies and things to kind of explore. And he really, did like some of the things that I was exploring, and basically he tried some of the stuff, especially with defense, because that was what he was struggling with. And that's basically my strength in terms of how I kind of transformed mine to kind of get a scholarship in UEA, which was my college back at the state UK. So, I taught him some footwork stuff. I taught him areas to kind of, really work to kind of strengthen on. And basically, after a few sessions, I think it was like within 1 or 2 months, he, stayed with the team, and then they were playing in a league called ABL. So that's Asian Basketball League. And they were again, he was against some imports, which basically is very, very high level players. And one of them was Mario Chalmers. So he's an ex-NBA player who won the chip with the Miami Heat from at like 2012 and 2013 back to back. And he was actually locking him down really well. Chalmers wasn't really getting to his spots and was frustrated at him. So I think that was basically his breakout season in terms of defensively. And then because he kind of had that achievement and basically being known as a more of a 3 and D player right now, and got some solid contracts, he started to refer me out to some other, players around Asia. And that's how, I've kind of started to get into more of the basketball realm in terms of like a physical trainer, but also the skill side, which I kind of later stumbled upon. Yeah.
Brilliant, yeah. And so you're basically, the main thing was just the skill of the probably the defensive work. And what about the sort of did you do much strength conditioning with Sue, or
Absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of strength and conditioning work, absolutely. We did focus on that. It's almost also lower and upper body split. And it really depends on his games, because sometimes he has 2 games a week, sometimes he has 1 game a week. So programming for in season, off season, of course, is going to be very different. In season, you kind of want to maintain muscle mass the most, I think.
yeah,
That's probably going to be the most crucial factor in terms of like reducing injuries. It's been shown in studies as well. And I think I remember Preston Green talking about this in an article. He said the weakest areas for most basketball players are the VMOs, the lower back, and then I think the hip flexors as well, like these 3 areas. So getting them very, very strong is key for basically basketball players to take contact and also initiate it. And that's what we kind of basically worked off and feed off of. And within the strength side, he was pretty good with the numbers already because he was already into ACG. But we just try to bump things up a little bit more, make sure the volume is low so then he doesn't get too fatigued and just maintain the intensity high.
yeah, brilliant. I even just touch on that topic of in season, the main focus, because it doesn't really get highlighted enough about muscle mass. Because I remember Charles Pollock and reading an article with Charles Pollock, and that was his kind of, and he backed it up by science, is that that's the one of the main factors for injury risk goes up when you lose the muscle mass. Obviously, that's the muscle mass is protective, and obviously, if you lose muscle mass, your strength goes down. You've less potential then for power. So and what everyone wants in season, it's either maintaining strength or trying to get more powerful. But no one really touches on the actual muscle mass, how crucial that is. But again, it's a fine balance because volume has to stay low because obviously there's gains, but then you want to kind of have that functional hypertrophy in there as well. Especially around those areas for a basketball player if they're naturally weak. But it's something that probably isn't highlighted enough. And in terms of, I know I seen what I loved. I seen one of your posts, one of your reels was that there was some post game sessions, and I think that's very clever. I know with basketball season, with basketball, it's so extensive and intensive where there's multiple games per week, and if you wait always for a window of opportunity where the athlete's going to recover, you'll miss. You won't be able to get the sessions in. So I think it's a really smart way of doing this after the session, after the actual game itself. Could you talk maybe just briefly how you do a post game workout and what are the kind of main variables?
Sure, absolutely. So, post game, I think I've seen kind of NBA players doing it as well with their trainers, because I think the main thing that most people get kind of confused is that okay, so if let's say I got a game day today, right? And
Yeah,
then it'll be good for me to kind of do a leg day and then like maybe an upper day or whatever, right? But in reality is that you want to keep the high days high and low days low. And that means the more intensive days to be like all very incentive, like everything's going to be neurologically demanding. And so you actually get a full day of rest the next day. Yeah. Instead of like you having a game day, right? And a leg day, which is almost like back to back, which sometimes happens in game as well, where you might be playing one game and then the next day you're flying to somewhere else to play. That does happen. But if you're really trying to optimize your rest, I think it's definitely ideal to kind of group everything together in the same day. So usually for post game, right? It really depends on their minutes as well. That's I think like a key factor in terms of what we do post game. So let's say if you're maybe a bench player who only got like 5 minutes of game day of playing time, that's not really much work for you, isn't it? So basically, once we get to the gym, we can do a full leg day for you, and probably bump up some of the stuff to kind of make sure you're conditioned when you need it for the next game. Yeah. But if you're, maybe playing for 40 to 45 minutes in a full game as a starter, right? I think that's where we kind of probably got to be a little bit more wary. So probably doing a little bit more concentric work, such as sledding. That's always good to kind of remove the DOMs and maybe some accessories as well. So, for example, if I use Oliver, right, his hip flexors are relatively weak compared to his other areas. So we usually kind of do a lot of hip work, maybe some hip adduction work as well to kind of open up the groin, and maybe even a little bit of upper body stuff and core. So it's just sprinkling the things a little bit, almost like the cherry on the top. If you're not playing, if you already played 45 minutes, but if you haven't, I think the trainer should take note of that and really treat the post-game session as almost like a game day.
yeah. No, it's really it's clever. I think I love the sled. It's a tool for any sort of occasion, isn't it? Like it's brilliant for a session warm up. It's brilliant for after for the recovery, get the blood flowing. It's concentric dominance as well, and then it's also as well. It's a good way to get strength in. So you just can't beat the sled. Yeah, and then like in terms of then like so you have your post sessions. Would you do a before the session itself like a primer? Would you usually would you do let's a primer, let's say it'd be a post activation potentiation where basically you're trying to excite the central nervous system and excite the muscles. So basically then when you do play that they're already kind of really ready to go and already activated. So this typically happens either the morning of a training session or the night before, the day before. So would that be something you'd implement yourself, Harry, with your athletes?
For my athletes, yeah, definitely. So for example, usually in the morning. They might do a skill session as well, right? So I would usually implement the lifting stuff after the skill session. So like for the priming lift, to not affect their sh shot a little at all. And after the priming lift, they can actually get some nap. Some players actually do take a nap, which is good before the games. So some of the stuff I would include in a uh, priming lift day, for example, is probably going to be a little bit more concentric stuff. You're probably not going to be using as much of a full range of motion, but we're also going to keep the intensity high. So some of the stuff that would be good would be, for example, like trap bar deadlifts, maybe trap bar jumps, even using med balls. Med balls are great for, med ball throws are really, really awesome against the wall to kind of just get the whole nervous system almost activated, as well as, for example, the overcoming ISOs against rack pulls. I think these are really good ways that you can try implementing into your workout if you're having a game that day. It doesn't need to be directly before the game. It could just be a few hours, maybe I think the ideal window is about 6 to 10 hours, from what I read. And if you do that, I think, you might see a great improvement in your sport. So give it a shot.
Yeah, no, I think they're definitely worth trying out. In terms of you touched on there the isometrics, overcoming isometrics. Something it's an area I'm getting into myself. So you for your overcoming isometrics, would it be something like there being a movable object where you're pressing against it or pushing against it for maybe I don't know 5 to 10 seconds as hard as you can? Um, could you elaborate a little bit more on what you do and why you do it in terms of the isometrics?
Gotcha. So, yeah, overcoming ISOs. Um, you gotta actually have a good foundation of yielding isometrics first. You can't just kind of go straight into it. I think once you have a solid base of yielding ISOs, then going into like max overcoming ISOs would probably be a better option in terms of a way to kind of progress it. But if you just wanted to try it for the overcoming ISOs, sure. So there's a few ways to kind of do it. So one of them would be rack pulls, right? Just almost like a deadlift rack pull to kind of get the posterior chain activated, right? Another variation I really like is a split squat with the barbell between your thighs and then almost also against the rack. And that really gets the glutes and the quads really well. And not only so there's like also another variation where the barbell could be on your back, right? And then you're just kind of pushing into it for the calves or for the split squat variation as well. So a few ways that you can kind of play around with it. And usually the time period wouldn't be any longer than 10 seconds yet. 10 seconds is probably the max I would go for. 5 seconds is probably ideal to kind of get the really peak force output. But sometimes I'll also just kind of go for 3 seconds as well. Yeah, from 3 to 10 seconds. That's a really, really solid spot.
And just to clarify, so why you do them is if you want to basically help turn on certain muscle groups. So whether split squats might be the glutes, quads, the hamstrings. Also, again, to excite the nervous system as well. Would that be your kind of main reasons why you have them in as your primer?
100%. And also, actually, one added benefit to that is actually the co-contraction component. So just teaching everything to be in this place and almost producing max force in that position, that will be key. So doing the overcoming ISOs in almost like, I know there isn't something that's called sport specific, but I think almost having that position where they usually kind of get into the most would probably be most transferable.
Gotcha. Yeah, great stuff. And have you experimented with any extreme ISOs where it could be for like an extreme length of time? So, kind of one that springs to mind would be, I don't know who coined, I don't know if it's Jay Schroeder, but 5 minute basically in a split squat. This is body weight, and you're holding that bottom position. Again, it's for them co-contractions where you basically turning thing on and off, basically, different muscle groups. Have you experimented with any of those extreme ISOs?
For body weight, for 3 to 5 minutes, I don't think that's a huge, huge issue. But usually for my athletes, because probably at some point they're going to be switching off. So I'd rather just kind of keep everything to 1 minute, right? And then, but I load them into it. So they're almost like failing by the time they're like at 50 to 55 seconds. So for example, it could be maybe a rear foot elevated split squat, right? They're low into it, and then they're already and then pretty tired, basically in that position, yielding into it. But if you add dumbbells into it, that actually forces their body to kind of adapt a little bit further, and just using additional loads to kind of shorten the time period that it requires for the ISOs would probably be something I would go for more. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good tip and something that I use myself. Yeah, it's more time efficient. And like I know your training sort of has evolved. You can see it there. Like it was mainly ATG stuff on the kind of the rehab and the kind of injury reduction sort of stuff. Now you're kind of getting into more the plyometric stuff to go with that, the isometrics. Where you're kind of, I'd love to know where are your resources, your systems, where are your kind of learning's coming from? Who we kind of, is there any particular coaches or systems that you're following at the moment?
Absolutely. So one of my favorite in terms of plyometrics would be McKinney's Watson. He's based at the UK, and his program is called Plus Plyos. I've done his kind of coaching course as well, and that kind of dives deeper into the basically the four different ways of how you can use plyometrics. So there's one which is leaps, where it's kind of a double foot takeoff, right? So it's almost like a 2 foot bounce. And then next, how you kind of progress from that is bounding. So it's almost like alternating, right? Alternating left and right, left and right. And finally, it's hops. So it's all kind of single leg, right? All single leg. And finally, he actually adds one more, which is the deep tier plyos, where you're actually going to be in a deeper position than usual, and you're almost going to be pulsing and oscillating around there. So that's kind of similar to the yielding isometrics, but it just kind of gives it just teaches the body in the amortization phase, which is where the eccentric becomes a concentric, that small little isometric phase, to yield better and change directions better. So that's kind of how his program is, done. And he just kind of puts a lot of variations into it, which I really, really enjoy. And then other people or coaches would be Max Schwartzwell. He's a really good one. He's he's on his journey now. I think he's trying to actually make it the NBA. So his program is like trained like an athlete, but he does do some fun coordination stuff in terms of like the plyometric aspect, and his weight room stuff is more power based. So it will be more of like trap bar jumps, maybe some resisted stuff to kind of pair along with his day of training. And of course, there's one more which I'm sure many hoopers have already heard of, PJF, Paul J. Favorites. He has a really good understanding of like the sports science aspect, and does a good mixture of when to use partial range and full range. So I think, ATG for me, it really made a good base for me to start with, especially with Gen Pop, where they basically just got to get their joints healthy, lose a bit of fat mass, and also develop like muscles, right? But once the athletes have a good standard baseline to kind of go for, I think that to really prime their body or make them fine tune into the top 1 or 0.1%, I think there is some more specific stuff that needs to be done in order to kind of get them optimally for their competition. Because at the high level athletes level, right? Most athletes are going to they have the same amount of skills. You know, they're not going to be that much different. So some of the stuff that you got to do in the weight room might differ from others. So in order to kind of really, really prime yourself to become the best, I think that as a trainer, you got to find other ways to kind of peak the better.
Yeah, no, brilliant. It's a topic I've a lot of interest in. Like, and I think you're right. I think ATG, it solves a lot of problems for a lot of athletes where they have a lot of weak links, they have underdeveloped areas, and it's more structural balanced. And I think for the most part, ATG plus your sport, I mean, can create a really, really strong and powerful athlete if you're training. But then there's other layers, So I think ATG does a lot of good stuff for your general PP, your general physical preparation. As you says, it's muscle mass in the right areas, balanced body, and getting strong, getting strong in areas that I think, like areas that have a lot of carryover. But then, as you says, you go up the pyramid, and now, how can you get, let's say, someone who has their weak links kind of sorted out? They've no real weak links. They're structurally balanced. They're strong. Now how can you add other layers? And I think it all comes down to tension. So like, there's more obviously tension with the likes of the plyometrics and the depth jumps and your ballistic jumps, and so there's going to be more stress going on to the joints, you know. But obviously you have to have, the problem is though, if people do apply too much plyometrics and not enough the joint health stuff, that's when there's injuries happen. So what I'd love to know is, when would you have someone, an athlete, what you said standards, would it be the kind of standard kind of ATG? What sort of strength markers kind of would you like your athletes to have before you incorporate more of the, let's say, impulse, the faster movements into the program?
Um, for that, I think some good examples would be some of the ATG standards, just kind of doing some of the body weight stuff really well and having the mobility to kind of get into those positions. For example, like a acid graph squat, even with heels elevated, I'm actually fine with that. But they actually got to be able to get into that deep position, because most players that I've seen is like they try to avoid that position to kind of get into it. So that's something very key. And also, some standards would be like probably 1.5x body weight. That would be a good standard to kind of go for, maybe for 3 to 5 reps. And if they're really elite, maybe 2 times body weight for 1 rep. That's a good standard for it. But more important than the back squat is actually the front squats. I find that most people kind of have like a huge imbalance between the front and the back squats. So if they're able to kind of do front squats really well, with no issues at all, that's a really good indication of probably the anterior portion of the lower legs. And then maybe for the posterior chain, right? Um, I usually kind of do for Nordic curls and seated good mornings. Those two probably tells me quite a lot about the assessment of, their knee as a flexor strength, which actually Preston Green talked about as a huge weakness of basketball players as well. And another, seated good mornings, yeah, having the groin mobility to get into that deep position and the lower back strength. If they're able to kind of actually get those standards down well, I think that's maybe when I start to do some of the other stuff. But for 95% of the athletes that I'm working with, they're still doing the basics.
Yeah,
So please do not take my word of like just going straight into performance and trying to do the partial range stuff. It does have its own benefits, but I think that probably after 1 or 2 years of solid training age, then you can kind of dive deep into that stuff. But for now, if you're only just starting, you're a beginner, you don't know where to start with, just start with dumbbells, start with body weight, get really good at understanding where your body is in space, and just get a good baseline strength of that.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. Hold on there. Hold on there.
You good?
Yeah, and like the think about it is, with a lot of these strength exercises, like for younger athletes, as you said, or someone who's weak, like the biggest bang for buck, and it's proven in the literature as well, is that if you get them stronger, that's going to have a far more return on ROI, return on investment, than these power exercises. Because you're only going to be able to express as much force as you're able to produce. So if you can't produce much force, well, you're going to be able to express it that much. So yeah, and I think that for most athletes, the basics, getting strong in the fundamental exercises you mentioned there, is going to have far more carryover to their athleticism and their sport. And then once they get to a certain step, I like kind of that 1.5 squat. If you can do a seated good morning with it, fully with a bit of 50% body weight, maybe an ATG split squat with 50% body weight, and maybe a Nordic, then I'd actually kind of put more of the power-based exercise within the S&C program. We've the last couple of minutes. So where you've where is kind of your next kind of, like, your you want to work with basketball players? What's your sort of other ambitions now for the rest of, let's say, in the upcoming years? you're looking to stick with basketball, open up your own gym? What's kind of next for Harry?
I think for now, it's probably going to be starting a clinic plus weight room plus maybe a court, a basketball court. But in Hong Kong, property is quite expensive. So right now, I think I'm just kind of honing in on what I can do on my own. Really trying to compound skills almost like as an interest. Learned that from Alex Hormozy. So he said, try to compound skills because that's something that can never be taken away from you. And I really took that to heart. So right now, I'm just kind of trying to educate myself as much as possible at my age. And I know that, most 22-year-olds aren't doing what I'm doing currently. And I don't want to be, I want to become one of the best in Asia in terms of like being a physio and also as a SNC coach, just so I can bridge that gap for them and they don't need to find another person for it since I'm already right there with them. And I think probably working with maybe some sports team or individual players will probably be the main goal in the coming years. And also actually having a team. I think that would be important. I don't want to keep everything to myself. I want to almost avoid some of the things that I have been through and basically teach it to coaches who are wanting to improve themselves and just pass it on to the next generation. So um, I'm not, I'm no one special. I'm just someone who's willing to put the work in and day in and day out and just try to explore some stuff here and there. And I think that will take you a really, really long way.
100%. What are you learning at the moment? I know you're an avid learner. What sort of stuff? What's your kind of main area of focus at the moment?
At the moment, I think right now, I'm trying to take a test for CSCS, so it's almost like a certified strength and conditioning specialist. Not that I might be able to learn some stuff in there, but I think overall it's just kind of like a certification license thing to kind of show others who I am, just a little bit more accreditation. But in terms of learning, actually, in May, I'm going to be learning about spinal manipulation, something to kind of just be have as an additional skill for as a physio in case it's needed. And yeah, and then maybe in terms of the SNC side, I think I'm going to dig into a little bit more on the RPR. So like some of the CalDeet stuff, that's always kind of good to know. And probably a little, never too much about Charles Poliquin. Yeah.
No, and there's endless amount of resources and articles he's done, and yeah, I think definitely would have another podcast about the RPR, the reflex training that Carl Dietz and Chris Corfus do. So that'd be a really good topic in it itself. But time is against us. Really enjoyed our chat, Harry, and I think I definitely think you know you're going to go. You already are at great places at such a young age, as it says, and I think you're going to be definitely an SSC coach slash physio that will be at the forefront in your area. And I think in the next few years, you will become one of the best around, no doubt about it. I think, as it says, your maturity and your appetite for knowledge, I think you're going to go really, really far. So, listen, Harry, pleasure. Thanks for coming on. Enjoyed our chat, and I'll be in touch.
All right. I appreciate it, Adam.
All the best.